A cowboy thought he captured an Apache girl, but what happened next shocked an entire village. Don't miss this powerful tale of courage, loyalty, and unexpected love. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's get started. The year was 1872, and the borderlands between New Mexico and Arizona simmered with unrest. Settlers pushed deeper into Apache lands, and every mile claimed sparked new conflict. Luke Callahan, a 28-year-old cowboy, had no stake in war. He sought only his stray cattle that had wandered into the hills. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. His lasso, cast in habit, tightened not around a calf, but around something unexpected. A young Apache girl burst from the brush, tangled and fierce. She couldn't have been more than 20, her dark eyes blazing with a fire that struck him still. The moment the rope caught her, Luke's stomach sank. She was not prey, not livestock. She was a human being, proud and defiant. She screamed, thrashing like a wild mustang, words pouring from her lips in sharp bursts of Apache he couldn't understand. He rushed forward, trying to calm her, but she struck him, nails tearing skin. Only when exhaustion overtook her did she slump against the rope, chest heaving, still glaring at him with unbroken pride. Luke stood frozen, horrified by what his own careless action had begun. His first instinct was to free her, yet fear stayed his hands. If he untied her, she could run straight to her people, and he would be marked as an enemy forever. His heart pounded as he tied her wrists, not in cruelty, but with trembling hands that hated the act. He had never been a captor. He was a cowboy, not a soldier, not a raider. And yet, here he was, with a girl whose fate now hung in his uncertain choices. Luke lifted her onto his horse, careful of her bruised arms, though she flinched at every touch. He rode hard toward his cabin, every shadow in the canyon, making him fear that Apache riders would appear at any moment, demanding blood for blood. By the time they arrived, sweat streaked his face despite the cool night air. He set her inside, offered her water, bread, and a blanket. She accepted nothing with words, but her silence held more defiance than any weapon. News traveled faster than horses on the frontier. By nightfall, whispers spread through the settlement. Luke Callahan captured an Apache girl. Men gathered outside his cabin, rifles at their sides, faces twisted in suspicion and fear. Some demanded he hand her over to the sheriff. Others muttered that she should be driven back into the wild as warning. Luke stepped into the doorway, revolver in hand, jaw set tight. "She stays," he declared. His voice was steady, though his heart thundered. For once, he felt conviction burn hotter than fear. Inside, the girl sat by the fire, her wrists freed now, though she made no attempt to flee. She stared at him as though weighing his soul. He saw neither gratitude nor terror in her gaze, only a quiet, unyielding strength. He asked her name. She gave none. He placed a blanket over her shoulders. She did not thank him, but neither did she throw it away. That small acceptance felt to Luke like the first fragile thread of something neither of them understood. The cabin walls groaned in the wind that night, but the real storm pressed from outside. Villagers lingered, muttering about Luke's defiance. To them, Apaches were enemies, raiders who had taken lives and burned homesteads. To Luke, watching the young woman's steady eyes in the firelight, she was something else entirely, a person caught between two worlds, as much a victim of violence as anyone in town. He couldn't explain it, but giving her up felt like betraying more than just her. It felt like betraying himself. Hours stretched slow. Luke stayed awake with his rifle across his knees, while she dozed by the fire, her face softened in sleep. Without the sharp glare, he saw the bruises on her arms, the marks of hardship he hadn't caused but couldn't ignore. Guilt twisted in his chest. He wondered what life she'd been running from or toward before his rope had changed her path. He whispered an apology she could not understand and perhaps would not have accepted. But saying it eased something heavy in him. When morning came, she stirred, stretching beneath the blanket. For the first time, her voice softened into words he could understand. "Nylon," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. Her name. Luke nodded, repeating it gently, tasting the syllables as if they carried weight. Nalin. It suited her, sharp as stone, yet flowing like water. She gave him no smile, but her eyes flickered with something less hostile. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps the faintest hint of trust. That day, Luke faced the world outside his door again. Men stopped him on the street demanding to know why he kept her. He offered no explanations, no apologies. "She's not yours to judge," was all he said. The tension grew thick, each word another stone on a fragile bridge. He knew he couldn't hold out forever, but he would hold out as long as it took. He didn't understand why, only that something about Nalin made surrender impossible. By nightfall, Luke returned to the cabin to find her tending the fire, her figure outlined in its glow. She looked up at him, and for the first time her eyes didn't burn with fury. They held questions, unspoken but heavy. Luke knew answers wouldn't come easily. Not for her, not for him. But as the silence stretched between them, it wasn't cold anymore. It was something else. Something alive, fragile, and new. Luke lay awake again, watching her sleep, and realized the truth he hadn't dared face. Capturing her had not trapped her at all. It had trapped him in a choice that would test his courage, his loyalty, and his heart. She was no prisoner. She was the storm, and he was already caught in it. By morning, the tension in town coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Whispers rippled through the streets, louder with each passing hour. "Callahan's gone soft," one man spat outside the saloon. "He's sheltering an Apache, no better than siding with raiders." Others muttered that he was a traitor, a fool destined for a bloody end. Luke ignored them, his boots crunching across the dirt road as he carried water back to the barn. Inside, Nalin sat near the open stall, wrists free, posture proud. She had not fled. She had not begged. She was waiting, measuring him in silence. Every glance she gave him was like a test, though she said little. Luke found himself studying her, not with suspicion, but with wonder. She carried herself with dignity even in captivity, as though no rope or wall could diminish who she was. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strength. The more time he spent in her presence, the more he realized she was watching not his actions, but his heart. He wasn't sure if he had passed her judgment, but he felt the weight of it pressing all the same. On the third day, the world outside their fragile truce erupted. A horn echoed from the hills, sharp and shrill, carried on the cold wind. The Apache had come. Riders swept into town like storm clouds, war-painted, fierce, armed with rifles and lances. Mothers dragged children indoors, shutters slammed shut, and men snatched up weapons. Fear soaked the air, heavy and suffocating. Luke's chest tightened as the first rider entered the main street. At their front rode a tall man, his face carved with years of hardship and authority. He was no mere warrior. He was a chief. He was Nalin's father. The villagers scrambled, rifles raised, forming a wall of bodies along the street. Their fear twisted into hatred, and their hatred into reckless courage. The chief dismounted, his presence commanding silence. Then in a single heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Nalin stepped from Luke's cabin. The girl, everyone thought captive, walked freely into the open, her head high. Instead of running to her people, she turned and stood beside Luke. Gasps rose from the crowd, louder than any gunshot. Her choice was clear. She had drawn her line, and she had drawn it at his side. The chief's eyes, hard as flint, swept from his daughter to the cowboy who dared stand with her. He spoke in his tongue, his voice low but thunderous, echoing across the dusty street. Luke could not understand the words, but he understood the fury. Nalin replied with equal strength, her voice steady, defiance carrying each syllable. The villagers muttered in confusion, unable to understand the exchange. But Luke saw it written on their faces. She was defending him. This girl he had roped by accident, who had every reason to despise him, was now his shield against two worlds. For a breathless moment, Luke thought the next sound he heard would be his death, the crack of a rifle, the swish of a lance. He could feel his heart hammering, could almost taste the dust of the grave. Yet Nalin's words carried a weight he couldn't measure. The chief's eyes narrowed, his jaw set tight, but slowly, deliberately, he raised one hand. The Apache warriors lowered their spears. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle cry. The chief gave one curt nod, sharp and final. Without another word, the riders turned, mounting their horses, and vanished into the horizon. The townsfolk stood frozen, their weapons still drawn, but their courage draining fast. No blood spilled, no raid followed, just the thunder of hooves fading into the distance. When the last echo was gone, their eyes shifted back to Luke. They looked at him not as a man anymore, but as something uncanny, a figure caught between life and death, spared by a miracle. They didn't understand what they had witnessed, but they knew it wasn't luck. It was the girl. It was Nalin, and somehow she had chosen him. That night, the cabin was cloaked in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence. Luke sat by the fire, staring into the flames, unable to untangle the knot of emotions twisting in his chest. When Nalin finally spoke, her words startled him more than the Apache charge. In halting but steady English, she said, "You treated me as human, not enemy, not animal. For that, I stood for you." Her dark eyes softened as she looked at him, and for the first time he saw not just fire but warmth flickering there. Luke swallowed hard, unable to speak at first. He had thought himself her captor, her unwilling guardian, even her protector. But the truth struck him like a hammer. She had saved him. She had faced down her people, risked her standing, and silenced her enemies not with violence but with loyalty. He had expected hatred, perhaps vengeance. Instead, she had given him something far rarer, trust. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something deeper, respect, gratitude, and a dangerous tenderness he dared not name. In the days that followed, the whispers in the village shifted. Men who once cursed his name now looked at him with suspicion, even awe. Women whispered that the Apache girl had bewitched him, while children peered curiously from behind their mothers' skirts. But beneath their words was a truth none could deny. Luke Callahan had faced the wrath of warriors and walked away, spared by a girl who should have hated him most. Their bond was fragile, unspoken, but undeniable, and it shook the walls of prejudice thicker than any frontier fort. Each evening, Luke found himself drawn to the firelight where Nalin sat. They shared few words, her English broken, his Apache non-existent, but they found other ways to understand. A nod, a glance, the way she handed him bread without fear, when she laughed softly at his clumsy attempt to mimic her words, and the sound struck him like music, something he hadn't realized he missed. She wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live, and in her presence so was he. One night, the stars blazed clear above the plains. Luke stepped outside, and Nalin followed, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She tilted her face to the sky, whispering something in her tongue, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a memory. He stood beside her, saying nothing, but in that silence he felt closer to her than to anyone he had ever known. They were two souls caught in the collision of worlds, yet somehow, against all odds, they had found each other. The frontier was cruel, merciless, and divided by blood. Yet here, on its raw edge, something different had sparked. Not just survival, not just defiance. Something rarer than gold, stronger than steel. Love was too fragile a word for it, yet love was what it was. Unspoken, unexpected, and undeniable.